Hello, RP people, and welcome back to another episode of Role Playing as Smart People, the podcast where we pretend to know what we're talking about when it comes to all things tabletop. My name is Santa, and thanks for tuning in again. Scott and Finder are currently playing hooky, but do not fret. I have not one, not two, but three fantastic RPG designers here to talk about their upcoming Kickstarter. Let me introduce you guys to Brian Saliba, Zach Tyler, and T.G Grackle. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Santa, thanks for having us.
Oh, it's
Thanks,
a pleasure.
Santa. Nice to meet you.
Oh, very nice to meet you guys too. It's always a pleasure to have creators on. I find it's the one thing that always amazed me about tabletop is just the amount of creative things that people can do, and you just find stories that you'll never find in a book or anything like that really come to life on the tabletop. And I'm really excited to talk to you about your upcoming Kickstarter. But before we start, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about your tabletop background. Hey, what was your first RPG even? Brian, would you like to get the ball rolling?
Yeah. My name is Brian Saliba. I'm founder of Crowbar Creative, which is a tabletop game design company. And let's see, my role-playing game experience goes back to sometime in the mid-'80s when my oldest brother introduced me to it. And it must have been, that would have been the original Red Box that he was playing with his friends, and then graduated to AD&D, and then 3.5. Played a lot of 4, and now 5, and lately have been playing a lot of more OSR stuff and running and writing more OSR stuff until this project came around, which is, as you know, a 5e setting and supplement. So
wow.
That's me in a nutshell.
4th edition. Not many people admit they played a lot of that.
I did. There were a lot of things. It's funny to see the conversation around 4th edition kind of coming full circle, and more people are acknowledging what it did well. And I think it did do a lot of things well. It's a really cool tactical combat RPG. It didn't do a lot of the things well that people expect Dungeons and Dragons to do, but for what it was designed to do, I think it's a really smart system.
Yeah, well, it was originally created to try and almost bring in like the World of Warcraft, like the online massive multiplayer games, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was, everybody had powers, and it was a little hard around the table because I just found all my players were always drowning in paperwork, trying to figure out which of their powers to use. But I've just seen more conversations online, people suddenly saying, actually, it's not that bad if you know what you're getting into, and if you're not expecting, deep role-playing aspects to the game. But these days, everybody wants deep role-playing aspects because Critical Role and Stranger Things and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. I almost kind of I've always been more of a fan of like almost like the episodic RPG styles where it's like each one is its own self-contained, and that's a little bit harder to come by right now. But yeah, what about you, Zach? What's your history on RPGs?
Yeah, well, my name is Zach Tyler. I'm a writer based in Washington, D.C. I started playing role-playing games. I feel like I learned how to read playing role-playing games when I was just very young. And then my brother, my older brother, looped me into Star Wars RPG. I'm struggling to remember which version it was, but it was fantastic. And then my first game design experience started when I wrote up a setting for my friends in grade school for the Redwall universe because I loved those books so much. And I've been playing RPGs since. And yeah, like Brian, I'm more recently into the OSR games, but I play a lot of 5e, and it's nice to actually be back in the 5e rule set for this Dr. G book that we're working on.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I find it kind of cool because I've played a few OSR games. In fact, Scott, who can't be here, he's written a couple himself, and it's such a neat kind of like break from. I would. It sounds weird because I know it is very traditional tabletop, but it's almost kind of a neat break from the current tradition of tabletop, where it seems like everything's pretty, deadly for one thing, but the rules themselves are very slimmed down and straight to the point, but still well enough so you can create whatever you want.
Yeah, no, I I like that you mentioned the deadly component to it. I kind of have a reputation at the table for um I I love it. I love a good character death. What can I say? And even if it's my own, if they if my own character dies, I feel like they live on in the legends a bit more. But yeah, no, I love that. I love those aspects that you cited about OSR. And I only start. I mean, yeah, I guess it's only been a few years since I've really gotten into it, and yeah, the it's so lean, it's so adaptable. You're not flipping through the pages like Brian, has was talking about with the fourth edition. So yeah, no, it's definitely something I love. But I have a lot of love for 5e too, um, and we're going back to that a bit here in terms of well, I guess both Brian and I have played a lot of OSR lately, and it's yeah, I feel like sometimes the influences are bleeding through at times.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, Sandy, you bring up the lethality and kind of randomness of OSR games versus fifth edition. And interestingly, a lot of what we're doing with Dr. G, or what we're trying to do with this setting, is to bring some of that into the 5e space. We're not unique in that regard. I think a lot of games or settings and ancillary rule sets have introduced more chaotic elements. But I don't know, it could be something that we circle back to later about how our love for OSR, not even current old school Renaissance games, but actually the actual old school games that we used to play, how some of those elements that you mentioned really lend themselves to Dr.Grordbort, the source material written by Greg Broadmoor, and we've tried to kind of bring that stuff into this 5e setting. So anyway, something we can circle back to at some point, maybe.
Oh, we definitely are, because I, I'm like you, Zach. I love a good character death. Um, I've always said that you don't remember all the things that went great. You remember the things that went horrible. And when a character dies, it's usually something that you'll talk about for months.
Oh yeah, no, we are kindred spirits. That is for sure.
I'll have to get you into one of Scott's games. I before like this year alone, I think I've already had like 7 characters die. And it's all been my own fault. I can't blame anything else but myself on that. But I'm glad that I died. They're all great. So, and now on to Grackle. Uh, tell us a little bit about your history in RPGs.
Sure. First off, congrats on the character deaths. That's very exciting. A little tough acts to follow with Zach and especially Brian. I got into role playing games in high school, played some 3.5, and then drifted away a bit until I came back in hard with 5th edition, and then have been lucky enough to be playing consistently since that dropped, and DMing actually for years now as well. Also pretty consistently, which is, when schedules allow.
Yeah.
And then also enjoy some other RPGs, DMing again, or GMing, I should say. I like the one-pagers too, like Lasers and Feelings. Stuff that really lets you kind of like slim it down and focus on the interactions in the role playing.
Yeah. No, I'm. It's funny because like I'm so far I've not heard anything that I disagree with. I love
we'll
kind
work
of,
on that.
I'm actually also huge into like the slim down ones also. I do like myself a little crunch, but I find crunch gets a little crunchy, I guess. But I'm also kind of a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to tabletop as well. I didn't start until I think I was like 20 at the time. And just because I knew no one ever around me who ever did it, and then one friend suggested it, and I was like, I don't know. And he's like, "Well, come for one session. If you like it, maybe come for another." And well, it's been 13 or so years already, and I'm still talking about it to this day. So,
Next thing you know, you got a podcast.
oh God, I hope not, man. That would suck. I heard
And
that a
that's the
lot of.
thing. I think like before fifth edition, that's kind of how it was. It was kind of like you kind of had to know a guy, and that was going to get you into role playing games. And now it's just so much more ubiquitous that people can really feel a lot more comfortable just picking something up, watching or listening to a podcast, watching a live stream or something, and feel comfortable just playing a game, which is great.
Or even admitting that you play the game.
Also, yes.
Right. I'm still not used to that one. It's like way more socially acceptable now than I think it was about 15 years ago.
Oh,
Don't be a closet nerd anymore? What?
Yeah, I'm now letting my nerd flag fly high and proud nowadays. But yeah, I started with GURPS, which I think a lot of people would be surprised with. Yeah, fun system, but oh my God, do you have to tailor that to a system?
Yeah, it can get crunchy quick. It's super lean, but doesn't. I've never played it. I've read it, and it seems like it starts lean, but can balloon on you pretty quick in terms of crunch.
Well, I remember in order to create my character, because there's so many options, and I forget what the point value is that you have to have. Someone online has created an app, so with all the things in it, so you're able to go through with the point values and knock off everything. And even with all that, it took just to come up with my character sheet, like I think 45 minutes. It's ridiculous. But
That's
I think
steep on ramp.
Oh, I think if you just use the core, it's not that bad, but they have like 10 million supplements still coming out to this day.
Right.
But I think we should get on to, the core of the episode, which is something I'm really excited about because I love satirical games. I don't think they're made enough. And when I was reading your description of it, of Dr. Grordbort's Scientific Adventure Violence, I was like, oh, thank God, satire. I love satire in games. So happy about that. And then my second thought was, how did you guys come up with that name?
Well, it all starts with Greg Broadmoor, who's a lead designer at Weta Workshop in New Zealand that did all the Lord of the Rings and District 9 and very prominent special effects house for movies, and they do a lot of other stuff too. But one of their designers, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, started making ray guns. I mean, I hesitate to use the word steampunk because the Grordbort universe is really set kind of turn of the century. It's not really Victorian and clockwork and all that. It's really more electricity,
like industrial age kind of.
Yeah, just okay. It's 1920s, so it's kind of just prior to World War I, which actually doesn't happen in the Grordbort canon for various reasons. But anyway, Greg started making ray guns, and kind of like the story about how Tolkien first invented the languages and then invented a world where they could live, and thus Lord of the Rings and all that was born. Same thing kind of happened with Greg. He had these ray guns, and then he started writing kind of catalog entries, like old Sears and Roebuck catalog entries for these weapons. And from that, it evolved into the voice for those catalogs was very satirical and pointed, and it was poking fun at consumer culture and these highly deadly, unpredictable weapons that could blow up in your face, perfect for kids, that kind of stuff. So that evolved into then comics. He wrote and illustrated a number of graphic novels in the Grordbort universe. Most of them feature, I think all of them actually, featuring a character whose name is Lord Coxswain, who is this kind of archetypal gentleman explorer, big game hunter from Pulp Fiction in the 1920s. And it's his adventures in the solar system and making a mess of things terribly, because all of this stuff that Greg created, Greg himself is a very switched on, intelligent guy, and he has a lot of opinions about things like British colonialism and patriarchal societies and sexism and all of the stuff that was kind of part and parcel to the British Empire back then. So the work that he created, all these catalogs and these descriptions of ray guns and the graphic novels themselves, all bore that same satirical, pointed humor. And I came across, it's great stuff. If you haven't seen it, there's actually a book called Onslaught that was published by Titan, and it's a kind of omnibus. It has all the comics and or I think most of the comics and all the catalog entries and the bestiary, and I mean, he created monsters, and there's a whole world lore already created by Greg and illustrated by him, and he's incredible. I mean, he's just unbelievable artist and creative mind. So I came across those books in like 2014, and then they ended up going into storage, and I went overseas for a couple of years, which is where I met Zach and Grackle, actually. And then when I got back, I rediscovered those books when they came out of storage, and I thought, I just fell in love with them again and thought, I love this stuff. And furthermore, it just sets up so nicely for a role-playing game adaptation, because you have already created these kind of catalog entries of different alien races and monsters and tons of weapons and tanks and jets and all that. So it just felt like, gosh, all you really have to do is stat these different things up, and you kind of have a setting. But then as I dove deeper into the material, I realized that the satirical nature became really, really apparent, and I realized that in order to do this right, you would have to carry that through into the role-playing game. And that's, so I guess all this is to say that it wasn't me or the three of us sitting around and saying, let's create a satirical role-playing game about the 1920s space exploration based on old Buck Rogers serials. It all started with Greg's creation, and then us going to Weta and to Greg and obviously getting the license and their approval to do this, and then creating a role-playing game that ports all of the cool stuff that he created, but also doesn't shy away from the satire, that really leans into it, in fact, because you can't do Grordbort without that stuff, if that makes sense.
No, that's really cool, because it's funny how, like you mentioned that last part, because I was even thinking the way, I was like, I wonder what came first, if it was actually the setting or if it was the satire. But no, that's really neat. Do you guys, like, the one thing I always worry about satirical work is how the audience is going to perceive it, because I know sometimes people look at it and they aren't sure if it's satire. Are you guys like figuring out a way kind of to do it so it still stays true to the satirical nature, but maybe kind of mellows down some of the things that might offend? Or are you just saying, no, this is the way it is, I love it for how it is, and I'm keeping it?
I ask us in a couple months when it's out. It's a concern, certainly. I mean, right now, and just the way our society is, satire is kind of a rare thing, or I guess becoming more rare. I don't know if I'd say it's rare, but it's so easily confused with indulgence in bad behavior, and there are a lot of ways to deal with tricky subjects in fiction or movies or role-playing games. One of them is to just excise all of the difficult things out, just take them out, and these things no longer exist in this world that we're creating. And that's a valid way of dealing with it. If people around the table just look, we don't want to play a game in which something like slavery or colonialism or sexism exists, then certainly there's a lot of options out there for that. But I think that it's equally valid to take another approach, which is satire, to exaggerate something that I think most people would agree, to exaggerate things that most people would agree are negative in our society, exaggerate them to the point of absurdity and farce, so that then they can be ridiculed. And that's what Dr. Grordbort, the source material that we're drawing from, does, and that's what we tried to do in this game, or in this setting. It's not a rule system; it uses the 5th edition rule system, but to try and to lampoon these things, as opposed to excising them, and it won't be for everybody. We have a disclaimer in the very beginning saying that if you're offended by satire, or this isn't for you. This is, there's a lot of other options out there for you. But we think that, or I think anyway, that it's still a very valid way of working through dealing with tricky issues in the world. And somebody like Paul Verhoeven in his movies, which something like RoboCop, or certainly Starship Troopers, is a great analog for.
I've been thinking of that one for quite a while too.
Yep.
It's a great comparison for Dr. Grordbort's, because there's so much that's cool in Starship Troopers with the weapons and the monsters, and there are things that you can indulge in as somebody who's watching that movie and really enjoy in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a whole lot being said about the military-industrial complex and human nature and all of these other things that are so exaggerated that they're clearly being held up for ridicule, and hopefully, maybe making people think a little bit differently about things that are problematic in our society, or in the way we approach war and death and all that. So that's kind of where we are. Ours isn't far-flung future, and using high-tech futuristic weaponry. Ours is 1920s, although the weaponry is ray guns. But it's I think a decent analog to that. But I don't know. It's a great question. I'm curious to hear what Grackle and Zach would add to that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Starship Troopers, because sometimes when I think about Dr. Grordbort's, what we're doing here, I'm like, well, this is so extreme that no one could think this was serious. And then I look and see how many big name reviewers completely missed Starship Troopers when it came out and thought it was just some normal action schlock for teens. I was like, oh, okay, hang on, this is an actual concern. Some people just don't pick up on this stuff. But one of the things I think is interesting about Dr. Grordbort's and what we're doing here is that basically all of the themes that we're directly exploring are present in standard D&D. Civilization versus barbarism and colonialism and pillaging are things that are kind of taken for granted in a lot of normal 5e. You've got your goblins and their temples, and everyone just feels fine running in and stealing things from them because they're seen as lesser. So in a way, this setting is actually just taking these issues a little bit more seriously and taking them with a little bit more empathy, and trying to step back from the perspective of someone running around pillaging and conquesting everything, and actually taking a look at who's on the other side of this and what other roles can you play, within this universe. What's it like to be a Venusian or a Martian on the other side of this, and what kind of place can you make as an adventuring party through this galaxy, when you're actually seeing the effects of colonialism around you and not just treating them as the way things are, like a lot of 5e does.
No, that's absolutely. I'm so glad you guys have the response that you do, because like I've said before, I love satire, and I find sometimes people take things either too literally or literally or too serious. One of my favorite examples of satire that I think went over so many people's head was, have you ever seen the horror movie Slumber Party Massacre?
Yes.
Yeah, and that movie, it is, by all accounts, it's dirty, it's kind of sexist, it's all those kind of things, and people look at them like, oh, that's a horrible movie, that's disgusting. And then once you actually look into it, you find out that the person who directed the whole entire movie, she herself is a feminist, and the reason why she did it is because she saw all these horror slasher flicks come out, and she saw how all the women would get killed, everything like that, and she thought, why don't I take all those tropes, throw them all into a movie, just for the fun of it, to make it a satire without people realizing it. And to this day, you'll have people who lambast that movie, not realizing that one little fact that changes every part of the entire movie.
Yeah, I think that it's. I don't know if it's a modern or recent phenomenon, but it does seem like um, there's a tendency for people to assume that if you have something in a game or a movie or a piece of fiction or whatever, that it is an homage to that thing. You know, that you
Mhm.
are therefore in support of it. And with any satire, all the way back to Gulliver's Travels, and through Monty Python and South Park and all of that, they have lots of very negative things in them. But the purpose, they're not paying homage to those things, and they're not supporting those things. It's the exact opposite. And I hope that that's how people will receive this. That they'll see that I mean, the primary issue that is being lampooned is British colonialism. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of them in there, but that's kind of the big one. And hopefully people will see that the fact that colonialism is an issue in this setting doesn't mean that uh, that we support it, doesn't mean that we are hoping that others will play this setting and enjoy all of the wonderful things about subjugating another people. In fact, it's lampooned often and relentlessly throughout the setting and throughout Greg's source material.
Mhm.
Lord Coxswain, who is the epitome of all things that were bad about the British Empire, is the hero of the comics, but he's so clearly not a hero. He makes a mess of everything. He blows everything up. He, treats everybody poorly, especially those who are deemed to be beneath him socially. And it, it it makes I think a powerful and very entertaining and fun statement about that period and that way of thinking. And uh, that's what we hope happens. I mean, with a role playing game as opposed to a movie or a book, um, you are kind of handing people a toolbox, and they can do with it what they will.
Mhm.
Certainly, a group could sit around a table with this setting and decide we're gonna we're gonna really indulge in some hardcore colonialist fantasies that we all secretly harbor. Um, that's kind of out of our control, but the way that it's written and the way that at least the way we've tried to write it and design it um, is to make it clear that that's not the intended purpose of this thing. That it's colonialists by and large are not to be admired or emulated. The British Empire is a giant evil, for the most part, evil entity, doing all kinds of horrible things. And so we hope people um, will see it that way.
Mhm.
But who knows?
Not take it as your personal beliefs, but as the satire work that it's supposed to be. Yeah. No, I understand you.
I hope so. You had something you wanted to add?
Clap that out, Grackle.
Yeah, sorry.
You're good. Yeah, no, I remember talking to Greg about this one time also, and he made what I thought was a very good point of, the subject is pretty flagrantly British imperialism and colonialism, but also one of the things he mentioned I thought was interesting is the broader thing is about exploitation in general. And this is kind of the face it's wearing in this setting and what he, as a Kiwi, is, more intimately aware of. But it's really showing just the negative effects of exploitation and the kind of things it enables and the kind of people that suffer from it on, all sorts of ends, and just the absolute negativity of it and what it does to people. And I think it's interesting in the way he frames this in the comics and other things, how it has the very sci-fi space gallivanting tone and adventures, but it feels like a lot of panels where something dramatically explodes behind the hero. He just pulls the panel back a little bit so you can see, the poor shopkeeper that just lost his shop and is flying through the air,
Right.
or, whoever was, in front of that tank when he drove it dramatically through town and is now squished behind or something like that. So it's really just interesting how he's taking this as an example of an even broader issue than British colonialism, and also how he's using this setting to kind of ironically, because the subject matter is, about cruelty and callousness and not treating people like people, he's taking the time and the perspective to just have a little bit more empathy for everyone who's involved in a story. And it gives it a very different look and tone than some of the old gallivanting, white savior comics you'll remember.
Mhm.
Yeah, and he also, it's also important for Greg, and he made this clear. He's had a lot of input in this game to make sure that we weren't being patronizing either, and saying, British Empire evil, Venusian freedom fighters good. That there's people are people, and that there are lots of gray areas in there. It's too easy to, and I think too trite to just say that all of the subjugated people are, it's the noble savage trap, that suddenly ennoble everyone who's being subjugated and paint everybody who's doing the subjugating as evil, paint them with broad strokes.
Mhm.
And that there are, for him, it's just people are people everywhere, and there are a lot of there are British people in this setting that are, surprise, not evil xenophiles, and there are Martians and Venusians and Moonlings who aren't entirely to be admired too. So being fair with the criticism, and not pandering by saying subjugated noble and subjugator entirely evil.
And we tried to get into that from the very first free quick start release that we put out, that is still available for free online at crowbar.com, and also should be on the Kickstarter page, in that the VFF have multiple factions, and they have very different ideas, and arguably both very, kind of valid or defensible ideas about how they want to resist the British. And so there's a real disagreement there, and there's a real feeling of, this is a group of people. This is not a noble monolith of plucky, Star Wars style rebels. These are people that are trying to navigate a complex situation and don't have a perfect or a certain way through it.
Or a unified one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now that's actually really smart. I find a lot of times like people will try and make it so it's a direct, and you can easily see, okay, these people are evil, these people are good, but it's never that simple. There's always going to be these like crazy ideas on all sides, and it's really just trying to find that nice little happy middle where everyone can kind of get along. But again, that's kind of impossible. So one thing I was curious about is, so what made you guys decide to put this setting into a 5e setting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's 3 or 4 reasons. And when we first started talking about this with Greg, we hadn't decided to do that. We thought we tried on a number of different systems for size, and we thought about creating a unique system.
Mm-hmm.
And we settled on 5e for a number of reasons. One of them is, I think it was Zach that identified that for all of the monolithic presence of 5e in the gaming space,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of stuff like this. That it might fill a kind of niche within that. Whereas in the OSR space, there's a lot more. I don't know. I think you're more likely to find a satirical, self-referential setting or approach to gaming in that space. Whereas 5e, at least from what I've seen, just seems to continue to take itself more seriously as time goes by. And from somebody who likes satire a lot, like you do, that whenever you see anything or anybody taking themselves too seriously, then that's the time to lampoon them. It's kind of Monty Python's entire ethos. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we thought 5e would be an interesting fit. That there's a space for this, maybe a way of presenting gaming to people who maybe have only played 5e showing that there's a different way, there's a different kind of approach, a more, you can satirize things. You don't have to be so serious, and the gaming experience doesn't have to be about cathartic emotional experiences at the table. Um, I mean, surely you can have those still in Dr.
Yeah.
Grordbort's, but I think just that was something that thought would be interesting. And another big one was the challenge of converting magic to science, because in Dr. Grordbort's universe, there is no magic. Full stop. This is the age of science, the age of reason. We'll have none of that silliness kind of thing. So
Yeah.
for us, then that was challenging, but one that we were interested in. How do we make sure that you can do all that stuff that you're used to doing in 5e when it comes to magic? Fireballs and sending spells and teleportation and polymorph. How do you make that work in a setting that has no magic? And how do you map it to science? It's more than just a reskin. It's we created a system. Mostly Zach did this, where you each spell and school of magic and spell like character ability or class ability is mapped to a particular piece of equipment, high tech gadgetry, and so when you're not actually casting spells, what you're doing is creating some kind of marvelous scientific effect that actually looks a hell of a lot like a fireball and does that same amount of damage, if that makes sense. So that was another really interesting challenge that we thought using 5e would afford us. But I don't know, Grackle and Zach, if you guys, I mean, we had obviously thousands of conversations about what system to use, so I'm sure you guys have input on how we landed at 5e.
It's kind of neat how you said that, because we were even talking, like me and the guys were talking, and we're like, I wonder why they didn't pick like Fate, PBTA, or any of those systems, because they do have more of a satirical kind of like audience, and we're wondering. But that is such a good point. That's super smart. Like, and the other part, yeah, Zach, I was wondering, how did you make technology feel different from just a reskin of magic? Like,
Yeah, well, first off, it's a major team effort. We had a lot of conversations on this, and the source material just worked out really well for it in the first place, because we had a whole list of different technologies, different items that could, and they're listed in Onslaught, that could produce these marvelous effects. And then it felt like a very logical step to start mapping out how each one of those pieces of tech could actually cast spells. And so in that way, it is reskin. But then we are adding, which is also true of the source material, the chance of a malfunction for each one of these pieces of technology. And so, Lord Coxswain in the comics, he's always firing ray guns that are always blowing up in his face, or robots are malfunctioning and killing entire towns. And so we wanted to really integrate that element of chaos into the system, and it really fit in with the magic system, and with ray guns and tech in general. But with the magic system, there's always that chance that when you cast a spell, it can go horribly wrong too. And depending on the piece of technology, the effects could range from you being petrified to maybe even something beneficial, right?
Or getting a spray of hot tea in the face.
Or yeah, exactly. But yeah, so we're hoping, with when it comes, and that's what I said at the beginning of the show, that there are some little OSR tendencies bleeding into this, and what we hope is that 5e is such an accessible game. It's so clean. It's been through so many iterations, and it's the most popular version of it ever. And what we're hoping is that we can capitalize on a system that is so user friendly for people at some degrees, at least you could argue, and then bringing in new elements to spice it up and add a little bit of chaos and flair to it as well. So I hope we've achieved that. but I guess we'll find out once it goes live.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to be disingenuous when I say the reasons why we chose 5e. I mean, the user base is way bigger, and that is a factor, but it's not the only factor. It's not something that I think Greg or Stardog / Weta are particularly interested in. For them, it's not how much money can we make off of this. For them, it's uh, how do we make it as cool as possible and make sure that Dr. Grordbort fans love it and people will be interested in Dr. Grordbort and how can it be authentic to the source material. So but that I don't want to pretend like it would sound fake if I said, whoa, we never even thought that 5e commands a 98.7% market share, and that never factored into it. That was a factor. It just wasn't the only one. And in terms of other systems you mentioned, I have no doubt that there are other systems that might support the satire or even the technology better. But it also comes down to, what did the three authors, what system did we all know? And each of us has slightly different gaming experience, but one thing all of us share is that we've all played a lot of 5e. So
Yeah.
If it so happened that three of us were huge Fate players or huge DCC players, which we have played a good bit of that, but if we all had a shared system that wasn't 5e that we felt most comfortable doing, then that would have been a major factor. But as it stood, there was no other system that all three of us had as much experience in as we do with 5e.
Yeah, all played and DM'd. And also just a slightly less crass benefit of 5e's ubiquity also is that there's so much knowledge about how to play it just out there. So that also helps you with just the pick up and play potential of this game. Like, ideally, that helps someone get from opening up the book to actually firing ray guns a lot faster than if you were using a brand new system or maybe a more esoteric system.
Right.
No, that's actually a really good point, because even like I'm a brand new GM, right? I only started GMing really recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm actually having a lot of fun. I won't go through all. I've already said my stories a couple times on what I'm currently doing, but when I was talking, they're like, go with a system, like when I was talking with Scott and Fine, they're like, Savage Worlds really well, so go with that one. So it's kind of what I'm running. And I think that applies to designing, to playing, to anything. Is if you really know something really well, it's best to go with something opposed to something you don't.
Yes. And we really think, and I hope that players and GMs will feel that way when they play this, that this is something that's going to be different enough that you've got a very vibrant concept of this different setting and all these explosions and lasers going off and these strange Venusian beasts and Martian, kind of these zombie-like creatures, but that you're going to feel comfortable. And at the end of the day, do still feel like you're playing 5e and you know how your character works and you know what's going to happen when this combat starts. Well, you don't know what's going to happen because it's going to go haywire pretty quick, but you know the general idea of how your abilities and stuff are going to work.
Oh, yeah. So we touched on this a little bit right at the beginning, but I know a lot of people have complaints. The one major complaint I find with 5e is that it holds your hand and it's almost impossible to to get yourself killed. And we were talking about some of the old school RPGs, kind of trying to imbue them into 5e. And so if you're an old school fan who doesn't like 5e because you can't die easily, what do you guys got in store for us?
A lot of death. a lot of extremely messy, catastrophic, totally unexpected, and unearned death. I mean, the main thing, and Zach brought it up, is malfunction tables. And really, these are fumble tables, right? These are critical failure tables, which is something that used to be in all old school games. It's just kind of seemingly been phased out a bit. Almost anything that you do in this game, you're interacting with technology. And anytime you interact with technology, there is a chance that everything is going to go haywire. But the extent to which it goes haywire is random. It's governed by these tables, and each type of technology has a different malfunction table associated with it. So if you are the Dr. G equivalent of a wizard, which is called a boffin, then and you're using a piece of equipment called a gadgetronic to cast a spell, and you roll within that piece of equipment's malfunction threshold, which basically is just if you fumble the roll, if you roll a 1, then you've got to go roll on the gadgetronic malfunction table to see what exactly happens. And some of them are benign. Every now and then you'll get one that actually comes in handy. The most extreme are entirely catastrophic. But each piece of tech has their own table. So one of the more interesting ones, I think, is the druid, or how we've styled the druid, which is an anatomy, like an anatomy,
that one.
anatomy anomaly, but an anatomally. And these are this character class actually injects into their organs strange substances from the ether in order to cast spells and shapeshift and do so. For them, their malfunction table looks a whole lot different than it would for that wizard. For them, it's their internal system that is malfunctioning because they're injecting it with weird stuff. So I wouldn't say that it's as harsh as maybe some old school systems or even old D&D, where for early editions of that game, it was kind of expected that you were going to die at some point. And it was like a next man up kind of attitude toward gaming. That has changed a lot now. I mean, I think, again, going back to Critical Role and how well developed those characters are and how attached fans become to those characters, and the idea of somebody dying is almost unthinkable.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of playing. I mean, it's not a knock on any of that. It's just if players want a bit more chaos, a little less predictability, then this adaptation of 5e has that, and it's very much in keeping, as Grackle said, with the source material, in which things are blowing up in your face, in the characters' faces all the time. This technology is not the substances and the technology are not super well tested. It's very commercially driven. It's quantity over quality. Let's get a ray gun into everybody's hand. Let's get weird gadgets into every household. So these things are malfunctioning all the time. And it also introduces the idea for repairing, and how that having a repair kit, which is a new tool set in the setting, is a really important thing, because if you've got a tank cannon that has not only malfunctioned but is now firing randomly all over the battlefield, having somebody who can run up and repair it, get it working again, is a huge key. But I don't know. I mean, this is really more. This is Zach's wheelhouse, because, as he said earlier, he loves a good character death. And in the 2.5-year campaign that we wrapped up recently, he must have set a record. I think he had in double digits of characters that died in that campaign. But it's not. I think. Sorry, Zach, before I hand it off. I mean, it's not a punishing system. It's not. We're not trying to kill characters in it. We're just adding a layer of unpredictability to things like casting magic.
You're giving them a murderous option.
I mean, there's just, when you're fiddling with strange substances and weird technology that isn't super well tested, there's just a chance it can go wrong. That was one thing about latter editions, or really any system, whereby when you cast a spell, you just press a button and bink, there goes my spell. No worries. It always, for me, just kind of, it felt off, because a lot of the old sci-fi and fantasy fiction I read, I love this sense that when you're tapping into these weird substances and weird powers that you don't really understand, things can go south fast.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that was why it's fun to bring some of those elements into this setting, because you can't just spam your fireball spell and expect nothing to ever happen. There is a chance that something could go wrong when you're dealing with these weird gadgets that are channeling these strange substances.
No, I'm kind of glad. For one thing, I love tables when it comes to tabletop. I love the like one of my I like 40K or any like those ones where it's like you roll and it's like, oh, you got bad, roll on this table to find out what exactly is going to be cursing your life from now on. I love those effects because they can put little, they can change the game so dramatically sometimes in ways that you just cannot predict. And I think, yeah, I'm so happy hearing all the things that you guys are saying. I'm not gonna lie, I do not own a single fifth edition book, but I might have to so that I can play your guys' game.
You know, you're exactly the kind of person we're hoping would give it a try, and you know, because I feel like, you know, it's a gamble. We'll find out, but my thought is that, you know, that kind of random tables bring in, right, like you said, that I feel it keeps the story in the area of improv, um and it hands over a bit more agency to players at times, and or it can have that, it can have the potential to do that. And you know, I want to be interested to see how 5e players react to that, and I hope it's, you know, a positive reaction where they actually find out that that little bit of chaos, or that when they roll a, you know, on that random table and it completely, you know, veers their campaign in a different direction, that's going to be a moment of, you know, joy and excitement, even if it's detrimental to the character. You know, I mean, it has that potential for it. It's and so yeah, that's what we're hoping for. And I think, you know, from playtesting at least, I think we're getting there. It's definitely deadly. It's definitely more deadly than a traditional 5e campaign.
Yeah, I've been reminded of the first playtest that I GM'd for this, where we had 4 players and one of them walked away alive with about 3 hit points. Absolutely chaotic battle. I remember distinctly, I have such a clear mental image of her getting down, kind of cornering the bad guy on top of this building. She like shoots down the little Zeppelin that was coming to pick him up. And then she's like, got the shot. She's going to take him out. Ray gun explodes in her face, collapses the building around her. And now we've got a completely different final fight environment than we were expecting. And it got very stupid very fast. And it was a ton of fun, I think. But yeah, Zach's character had just gone, you know, hand to hand with some robot and then run across the rooftops. It was messy. The malfunction tables really helped us have a silly time. And it was, yeah, if you're looking for deadliness, that definitely delivered that time.
Yeah, no, that even just that little blurb right there, like I could clip that and put that online, and I think that would probably grab quite a few people's attention.
I wish I had it, like I wish I had a visual of it, because I can see it in my head so clearly, of this building collapsing and these robots running around in this crowd. It was such a mess, and it was just a lot of fun.
I think there was a series where she crits her like acrobatics check to get to the boss, fumbles her attack with her ray gun, and then crits on the fumble chart for like the most extreme effect. So it was a series of rolls that got us there.
And that's the kind, I mean, you know, the dice tell a story, and I think the malfunction tables have a role in that, of giving you something just chaotic that's going to change the way this thing's going, and something that everyone's going to roll with. And definitely in that scenario, just had a much more dramatic final fight, and basically like a second act of the final fight that I was not expecting.
That sounds awesome. So here's a question: is your game easily to convert to theater of the mind, or is it mostly still deal with battle maps like 5e usually does?
I think you guys, I think Grackle, you've probably run it more than anybody, and Zach, you've played it more than anybody. So what would you say?
I'd personally say either way. We've included a few battle maps with the free quick starts themselves to kind of, if that's something you're interested in doing. I think I personally, when I was running that playtest, and I think all the playtests I've run, have used battle mats sparingly, mostly focused on theater of the mind. You know, it's easier. It kind of helps that pick up and play.
Mhm.
It helps you go from, you know, 0 to firing ray guns around, which I really appreciate. So we've designed it to, it's an interesting thing because we're dealing with ranged weaponry. We've been careful about, you know, the ranges of things, how that's going to affect combat, thinking through how that affects different classes' abilities, you know, down to the feet of, you know, the range of the different ray guns. This one only, you know, has an effective range of this far because it's a pistol. This one is a sniper rifle. So, oh my God, the range on this thing. Thinking through that a lot, but also I think it's very open for the theater of the mind, which I think is really conducive to the kind of the chaotic tone we have going here too.
Yeah. I just wanted to highlight what you said at the beginning there. I think it really is adaptable to how you want to play D&D. Like the stats are there if you want to pull out the battle map and measure, if the attack is in range to like the exact measurements. You can do that. But we've always, I think all three of us always play more in the realm of the theater of mind, and it works like a dream in that case too. You can take that information however you'd like.
Yeah, and I think in terms of immersion, one of the big assets that this game has has nothing to do with us and everything to do with Greg, and that's the art. I mean, the stuff that Greg created when he created this world is just incredible stuff. I mean, the ray guns are, well, they're works of art. You can buy them from Weta Workshop. You can actually buy a ray gun. They're usually sold out, but the monsters, the different species that he designed. He's the guy. He was the lead designer of District 9. So for those who are fans of that movie, you'll see some similarities probably between that and the Venusian character designs, for example. But the artwork itself is a big part of the game. And while there's a lot of, I mean, you can play it theater of the mind or on a battle map. I expect that a lot of DMs are going to be picking the book up and turning it around and showing the art as a way of encouraging immersion, because it's just amazing stuff. We're lucky to be able to draw from that.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually didn't know that about the District 9. I haven't seen that movie in ages. It was actually a pretty good watch. I remember it was a lot more deep than some people gave it credit for.
Yeah. It is. It has a lot to say. And Greg was I think the lead concept designer for that, and has been on Chappie, and he's done a ton of stuff. But this artwork in particular, there's piles of it. I mean, they've had not only the comics and the kind of catalog of creatures and weapons and vehicles. There's also what they call a Hall of Gits, which are just these amazing portraits of bizarre NPCs, or what we're using as NPCs from around the galaxy. And they've actually had traveling art shows, where they've taken all of this art they've created and had gallery shows around the world, just to show off the art. So we're so much of what we're drawing inspiration from is this art, and we're fortunate because we actually get to use the art in the book as well.
Oh, that's awesome. So for anyone curious about when this Kickstarter is actually going to get going, when is it going to start? Not that I'm looking for any particular reason of my own.
So August 23rd is the Kickstarter. Goes live. In the next, I think, day or two, the backer kit landing page will be up and running. So people can sign up there to be alerted, for when the Kickstarter goes live. You can actually, we have a landing page on Kickstarter now that you can go and, opt in for messages about when it goes live. Which we've got some fun day 1 and day 2 backer specials too, or exclusives that for people who back on those days. So hopefully a lot of people will be interested in signing up early and joining us on the Kickstarter. But yeah, August 23rd is the day, and book is all but written. We're in the kind of editing phase now. So Exalted Funeral is the publisher, so they exactly when it goes to press and all of that is in their hands. But Kickstarter live August 23rd, and for those interested, we have four different quick starts that are available for free. And it's something like 120 pages of quick start material, and not like an unedited Word document with basic rules. I mean, there's a full there's full bestiaries and equipment, and I think we have 11 pre-generated characters. So for anybody who wants to give it a go before backing, you can grab those from Exalted Funeral, from my website, crwbr.com. Dicebreaker put the fourth quick start out a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of material for people to jump in and try it out before the August 23rd date.
Yeah, and if anyone right now who's listening, if you go to the description of this episode, you'll see the link to their actual upcoming Kickstarter, so you can click to notify me so that you'll stay up to date with all this stuff when it comes out. Just if you're driving while listening to this podcast, please stop or get to your destination first before clicking.
Pull over.
Yeah, pull over. I can't afford a lawsuit
immediately, and flag other drivers down to tell them about it.
But we are not liable. Yeah, no, it honestly sounds fantastic. I think I have one more question for you guys before we wrap it up, because we're getting about the 1 hour mark. But it's more of a curiosity about something else. Do you guys have any OSR favorites?
Well, one that I really like is a big one, is OSE, Old School Essentials. I really like Gavin's system.
Yeah,
and I like the products that are springing up around it. I think it's attracted a lot of really interesting creators, and I wrote a setting for OSE and kickstarted it last year because I liked the system so much and wanted to create something for it. So that won't be revelatory to many people. I'm sure a lot of people already know about OSE, but that's one that I really admire, and I like the community around OSE, and I think the next game that I run will be that.
Nice. What about you? What about you, Grackle? You got a favorite OSR? I was about to say OSE.
I am of the group. I am more of the 5e focused person. I do mess around and I play in some other spaces, but I am the one who's really. We've got a nice balance on this team, actually. If I am more of the heroic fantasy kind of person. So while they are doing a little bit more of the absolute blood and guts in the muck kind of thing, I am, running around with a sword and righting wrongs. So I lean towards 5e. I will do a shameless plug for our publisher, Exalted Funeral, and do say that I have my OSE box set coming, though. I kickstarted it. I can't wait for these beautiful boxes. So definitely going to be getting into it more shortly.
And you always need someone to ring in the other people. Like if me and Scott are on our own for too long, Finder just doesn't know what to do with us. So I 100% understand that. You are probably the person who just makes sure everyone's on check. And I appreciate you for who you are.
At the same time, I am not infrequently the DM that does kill Zach's characters. So, we all have multitudes.
Yeah, you're not. It's going to remind you on that one. Santa, you sound like the kind of guy who would like. You've probably already heard of it, the Dungeon Crawl Classics or Mutant Crawl Classics. Those are two of my favorite ones, and MCC in particular is brutal. Some of the monsters in there, they'll have their own crit table, and if they roll, like a number of, a few of those different entries, it's like an instant kill for the player. Sawed in half, things just utterly chaotic. I ran a funnel of that once a couple months ago, and I've been meaning to get back to playing some more MCC, but those two games in particular.
Yeah, I know DCC. That's the one where you start off with multiple characters and you're just trying to see which one comes out alive, and that's the main character, right? Yeah. I played that one. I haven't heard much from. You said Mutant Crawl Classic?
Yeah, exactly. It's for the DCC. It's essentially the DCC rule system. It's a new setting, and it's sci-fi, and there's no magic, there's technology and mutant powers.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to take a look at that. That sounds cool. This is one thing I love about tabletop is even if I'm surrounded by it through this podcast, through the friends I have, everything like that, which ironically all my friends are online when it comes to tabletop, it seems like at this point, except for my new group. I never run out of RPGs to look up. There's always something different, something new that always pops up every day, and I think that's one thing I love about tabletop more than anything.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it can be overwhelming at times. I mean, we're coming up to Zine Quest, which it's just everybody's going to be flooded with really cool kind of underground content, and but there's just a lot of creative people um, making a lot of interesting things, and the wonders of crowdfunding and I guess self-publishing and the internet in general means that everybody has access to it,
Yeah.
which is great. Just it wasn't always that way.
No, it definitely wasn't. I actually it's funny that you said like Zine Quest, because for one, now I know how to properly pronounce it. And two, I actually picked up my very first one not too long ago. I've and it's so cool that people are coming out with these small RPGs for on like itch.io and all that. And I'm again, it's so cool, and I'm never expecting these kind of things, but they just seem to always pop up.
Yeah, there's no lack for creative people in this space, and I mean, at least what I've found, it's amazing how many times I'll spot something on Exalted Funeral in particular, because they're so dedicated to kind of lifting up independent creators. Um, Pick something up, never heard of it, get it, and I'm blown away. Like, what? This is incredible. I love this thing. And there's, just if, as everybody says, the only problem is you just finding time to play all these things. But
Oh yeah.
for me, even if I pick up an interesting zine or supplement and read it, get inspired, get fun ideas, and never play it, that's not a failure to me. I think that's great grist for the mill.
Yeah.
And I'd see a lot of people sometimes online saying, this sucks. Like, I can't play this thing. I read it and I love it. And I feel like, well, you read it and you loved it. That's a hell of a lot right there to take away from
Yeah.
something. Just because you can't get it on a table with people, that doesn't mean that you haven't, that it's somehow a failure.
No, 100%. Like, as long as you have people who enjoy it, like that's all that really matters at the end. Like, you see a lot of you don't see a lot of people, but like you hear of a lot of people who go into RPGs for kind of the wrong reasons. They just think, oh, I can make a lot of money off this and all that. And a creator I know actually said is like, if you're doing this because you think you're going to strike it rich, stop right now, because it's hard to get through. But if you truly love what you're doing, you're always going to enjoy your success no matter what it is.
And that's part of what's kept me really excited about this project, is knowing like if we somehow only ended up printing up 3 copies of this and the 3 of us got one each, that would still kind of be a win for me. Like, I wouldn't be too upset about that.
Yeah.
So no, and like you said, I mean, it's a really good point. There's so many RPGs out there, and if I could just give some really objective, disinterested advice, is just don't think about it too hard. Just kickstart Dr.Grordbort Scientific Adventure Violence and stick to that.
Oh, that's good.
Grackle is our master plug man.
Well, I like it. I like it. I suck at plugs, and every time I do it, I always feel like I'm doing a commercial. I just can't get the flow.
Oh, I do too. You just got to push right through the shamelessness, which is why I'll take the thing and plug my babies in this book too. Is that we've got dozens of new monsters also in this book. We've got fresh art for you. Different monsters for each planet too. We've got Mars, the Moon, Venus, all with their different styles and tones and themes. So it's going to be a lot of fun for me. When I get a new book, it's flipping through the monsters. That's kind of my favorite part. So I think people are going to be very happy with what they have in the back of the book there.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
And to Grackle's point, I mean, just if no matter what this thing ends up doing, the fact that Greg, the creator of this world, is happy with it, and so far he's extremely happy with it, is a huge thing for us. I mean, I respect him as a creative person a lot, and I love his work. And if we deliver something that we had fun making, which we have, and that he ultimately says, well done, guys, then I feel like I'll sleep well at night.
Has Greg been has he had his hands on the book as well, like, actually working with it, or is it mostly just been the stamp of approval?
No, no, not a stamp of approval at all. He's very involved, not
Oh,
in the
that's awesome.
writing, but whenever we get to a kind of crossroads where we need to steer from him. For example, we had one recently with regard to Mars and Martian technology. There's a whole world lore around Mars and what's happening there. It's a fallen civilization, and we had we were beginning to take that idea in one direction, and we ran it past Greg, and he had to kind of redirect us and say, no, 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 Mars is really about this thing, and so
Ah.
we incorporate it that way. But we check in with him often, and to make sure that we're on the right path, because a lot of what we're creating, we're kind of expanding the horizons of Dr. Grordbort. A lot of the stuff in the comics or the catalogs or whatever, a lot of the published material makes mentions of things, but doesn't go way beyond that. Whereas we're, creating a playable planet, and so he's been very hands-on, very accommodating. He's excited about this project, and as always, he gets back to us within 4 minutes usually with very detailed, enthusiastic, not only support but also really useful direction for. Usually, we present him with a series of options, like we could do one of these things, and he'll tell us which one feels more Dr. G to him, and then provide lots of useful feedback for how to get it there.
That sounds awesome. Like, it's nice to have someone who's so involved and still loves their work so much that he's helping you out at every turn like that. It just sounds so nice. I know I'm kind of being sappy here, but I don't
No,
care.
he's a dream collaborator. Actually, Weta, Stardog, and I mean all of them. That whole team in New Zealand have been unbelievably easy to work with, and we've gotten way more from them. I've done a lot of licensed publishing,
Hmm.
and you kind of never know what you're going to get with a licensor. And sometimes, as you say, it's just an imprimatur. We just send us. We'll send you our logo, stick it on the cover, and send us a royalty check. And other times, you get licensors that are so hands-on that they kind of hinder the creative process. And Greg is a perfect balance of that. That he likes what we're doing, but he's available to us whenever we need him to make sure that we're headed in the direction that ultimately he sees this universe going.
That's awesome. After we're done this, I'm gonna have to ask you for. You said the omnibus. I'm gonna have to find that name of it because I might want to check it out a little bit before I get your 5e setting. So kind of
Yeah,
curious now. I'm
there's another option for you too,
shoot.
Santa. We one of our backer tiers includes Onslaught, that big omnibus
Ah,
book that has the comics and all of Greg's original uh, work when he created this thing. So you could, at that backer tier, you would get Dr. Grordbort's Scientific Adventure Violence, the role playing
yeah.
game supplement, and the kind of canon fiction around it. So Titan's been cool. They allowed us to do that, to offer Onslaught as part of a certain backer tier. So you can get it all at once if you want.
That's
I
fan.
do have to I do have to plug, just so we understand the tone of what we're dealing with here. The full book title is technically Onslaught: Excessive Space Violence for Girls and Boys.
Yes.
So this is the kind of tone that we're having fun with.
Yeah.
Oh God, that sounds fantastic. I'm just gonna have to try and explain another Kickstarter fund to my wifey. Hopefully, she doesn't listen to this episode.
Well, tell her to back it too.
Yeah.
Do you have any kids? Get them on it.
No kids on that one, and trying to get her on that. That's I'm just not going to tell her.
Well, hurry up on those kids so we can get some more customers here.
Oh, that's funny. Well, anyways, folks, I think that's all the time we have for today. I'd really like to thank Brian, Zach, and Grackle for joining me today. It's been a ton of fun. I've really enjoyed it. Uh, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have concocted with this book. And for the audience, if you like this episode, please send me an email at rpsmartpeople@gmail.com or send me a tweet on Twitter at rpsmartpeople if you hated it. See you guys next week and have a good week. Goodbye.